Dr. Con McGregor's home when they were doing the filming. It was the newest, nicest home in town, and so he rented his house, and Dr. McGregor moved out for 3 months, but that was a bygone era.
So that was like in the 60s or something?
It would have been probably in the late 50s.
Huh.
Something like that. But they filmed a lot of movies here at one time. It became very popular for a period of time, and Maureen O'Hara and John Wayne, and there were several people that spent time here during the movie shooting. And I'm assuming we're doing just a conversation and you'll pull bits and pieces out.
Yeah,
I'm not trying to create a sound bite. You will create that when out of something that I say, hopefully, that will be usable.
Correct. Yep. And we're rolling, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so can you just introduce yourself? Tell us when you came here to Dixie Regional.
Intermountain Healthcare.
Yeah, Intermountain Healthcare, not IHC. I'm sure you know that.
So if I mention IHC, it's to be Intermountain Healthcare.
Right.
Okay. Well, my name is Steve Wilson, and it was my pleasure and privilege to serve as administrator of Dixie Medical Center beginning June 1st of 1985, and completed my time as administrator in early 2006.
Great. So let's start back with when you started. What was going on? What kind of advancements did you have with over the years?
Okay. I've been thinking about this interview for a few days and trying to think back of my initial impressions. I think the most significant impression that I had as I arrived at Dixie Medical Center was the incredible community support for its hospital. And it began with Barbara Watson, who was the board chair at that point. And Barbara was extremely passionate about all things hospital, was the biggest supporter inside the hospital and inside the community for the advancement of the hospital's capabilities. It seemed to me that Barbara felt a responsibility not just to serve as the board chair, but it was a calling, and a calling that was contagious with everyone she came into contact with. I remember that as a very strong first impression. I was introduced early to the history. Of course, at that point in time, the Dixie Pioneer Memorial Hospital that was built in 1952 still stood on the campus at 400 East. And we used a couple of rooms for ongoing hospital activity, and the remainder of the building had been rented to the Southwest Utah Health Department. We also still had on 200 East, the McGregor Hospital was still standing and operating as a nursing home. So there was an opportunity for me to feel a very tangible connection to that 100-year history that we now celebrate.
Great. So can you talk about some of the advancements that you were a part of back in those early years?
Yeah. The most notable advancement was in the process as I arrived, and that was planning for the development of a radiation therapy machine and the introduction of cancer services to St. George. I remember early on attending a planning meeting where Senator Orrin Hatch attended, and we had an opportunity to present our plans, the background which led to the community's desire to see cancer treated locally. And I was extremely impressed that not only did Senator Hatch listen and ask questions and express concern over the priority that we'd established, he said at the end of the meeting, "I want to be a part of this." And he pulled out his checkbook out of his coat pocket and he wrote a check for $1,000. And he said, "I want to contribute." Then he said that I will pledge to go back to Washington and do everything I can to see this project funded with help from the federal government. And within a year, a $4 million grant had been given to the community to begin the establishment of a cancer center and to help people be screened who might be concerned about an increased incidence of cancer in southern Utah. That was a tremendous breakthrough for our community and for the medical center. The establishment of the cancer center elevated our capability beyond primary care and truly was the first giant step towards becoming a regional medical center.
Great.
One of the other impressions that I had at that point in time that was extremely tender for me personally was one afternoon as the plans for the cancer center proceeded, I received a manila envelope that was fairly hefty, and I opened it, and inside was a rather large collection of coins that rolled out onto my desk with a simple letter that had come from 5 9-year-old girls in Washington City who had raised almost $30 from a lemonade stand and told me that they wanted to put all of that money to work on the new cancer center. It was a tender moment for me because it again reinforced the tremendous community support and awareness for the activities at the hospital and what was going forward, and the desire from all segments of our community to see those advancements happen.
Great. So you mentioned that back then when you started it was Dixie Medical Center. Can you talk about
Yes.
the changing name and why that happened?
One second before you start. Let's make a really quick adjustment here.
Okay.
Okay. I remember it being, let me see if I can find the sequence of events. I remember the event and the unveiling and adding regional to the name. And we honored the McGregor doctors at that point in time. Okay. It was in 1990, I believe, that we've completed a construction project on the 400 East campus that created a new main entrance to the hospital, one that's immediately behind or associated with the fountain on the south side of 400 East campus today. And we were also nearing the end of Dr. Con McGregor's career. He may have already retired or was in the midst of retiring. and we had a luncheon celebration and an opportunity to honor the McGregor physicians who had served in our community. And if memory serves me correctly, there were 4 McGregor doctors who served St. George community over the years, beginning with Dr. Donald McGregor, who established the hospital in 1913, and the 3 other McGregor doctors, ending with Dr. Con McGregor, had served our community for a combined 130 years, I believe. An amazing record for one family, and we acknowledged that contribution and created a small rose garden that still sits in front of that entrance at 400 East. And it was also seemed appropriate after the establishment of the Cancer Center and the changing nature of services provided at Dixie Medical Center that an expansion of services had now warranted perhaps a modification to the name. And it was at that point that we unveiled the name change to Dixie Regional Medical Center, which seems like a relatively small thing, but I assure you that represented a part of our mission and commitment to provide a level of care that surpassed other services in the immediate area, and for the most part established Dixie Regional Medical Center as the premier medical center between Las Vegas and Provo.
Great. Is that pretty much okay?
I don't think we picked it up.
So can you talk about how we started growing out of that old campus and how it came on this new one?
As more secondary and tertiary services were established, and as more physicians were recruited to the community, we indeed became that regional center for health services, which brought an increase in demand, obviously, to the point that it began to challenge the capacity of nearly every department at Dixie Regional Medical Center on the 400 East campus. The discussions about the future and the growth that was experienced in our community, which I don't think people fully appreciate, that in 1970 the population of the county was 13,000 people. And although I am getting older, 1970 didn't seem to be that long ago. So over a very brief period of time, in 10-year increments, the population would more than double each census, to the point where our continued growth and the future continued to look very bright for the St. George area, and the need to consider options for expansion became the number one agenda item for the governing board and administrative staff. Obviously, several options were considered, most notably, how do we expand in place? The facilities at 400 East weren't extremely antiquated. They were too small for the volumes that we were experiencing, but we still had a lot of useful life in the investments that had been made at 400 East. We looked at, in our minds, at every conceivable option to expand right there. Looking at high-rise structures, parking terraces, etc. We were sensitive with each of those options as to how it might impact the historical nature of our neighbor, the St. George Temple, across the street, and how that increased traffic volume would impact the surrounding neighborhood. And after examining multiple options, felt as though that our only viable choice was to move to a new location. We spent several months examining new locations. Where could we build? Where could we find 50 acres was our original plan. But finding 50 undeveloped acres in the city of St. George proved to be more difficult than one might think. After examining 3 sites, the location on River Road, which seems perfectly natural today as the perfect spot to have located the hospital, and anyone could have made that decision, was really a bit more difficult inasmuch as River Road did not exist at that point in time, that the roadway did not extend over Four Master Ridge, that infrastructure was still non-existent, and tumbleweeds abounded. But that location seemed to satisfy several objectives, which included remaining in the city of St. George, keeping true to that historical roots and finding a location that could still be accessed easily by central St. George as well as the surrounding area, as St. George had grown so much to the north, south, east, and west, and being able to find a location that was easily accessible by the general public as well as emergency vehicles, and to be able to provide for future expansion. I think we knew at the time we made the decision on the new campus that wherever we went to establish that new campus, that it had to be a place that would continue to be viable for another 100 years. And that's an interesting task as you look at establishing a building and the services that it offers, is to consider that it will be there providing those same services for 100 years. We certainly celebrate that milestone right now, and 100 years, as we look back, has gone by very quickly in some respects, but is a very long period of time with many changes occurring to technology and to the culture in which we live in. Looking ahead 100 years is a daunting planning task. I don't know if I answered the question.
Sam, will you hand me that board? Yeah. I need to cut this backlight a little bit. We keep getting people walking by, and this throws a shadow, and it's so. Yeah, about that right there, just about that distance. Don't take too much off of it. We won't be able to match up footage.
So I heard that
Out there.
there were some
Oh
problems.
man, I hate to have you do that.
And like the FEMA problems that with the campus and the delay that it caused.
You talking about that, about things you had to do so that you could build on this site.
It wasn't FEMA though, right? You're talking about,
Floodplain. Yeah.
It's, let me see, it was a wetlands issue. Our campus at River Road wasn't necessarily designed to accommodate what we had in mind. It clearly, as is the rest of St. George, is of sandy soil. We were basically buying property that straddled the Rim Rock Wash. And although it doesn't rain often, when it does, the Rimrock Wash has water that flows through it. To the north, there was a natural spring that created a small wetland that came under federal jurisdiction that had to be abated, and we had to understand the impact of development further down the wash and how that might affect a federally protected area. But the wash itself and the sand that collects alongside of a wash, and looking at the ability of those soils to be able to support the weight of the structure that we plan to build, all contributed to some unique engineering challenges, which resulted in the hospital being built on a large number of pylons, which resulted in the hospital being built on a series of concrete columns that were sunk into the ground until they hit bedrock to provide a secure foundation. As a result of that, clearly the hospital will stand that 100 years. That was the good news, but it did add significantly to the costs of the overall project.
Now, the River Oak Clinic was built first, right?
Correct. The first step in establishing the campus at River Road was to build the primary care services and the urgent care or Instacare service that now stands at 400. After purchasing the acreage on River Road, our first step towards the development of services at River Road was to build the primary care physician office building along with the Instacare. We were experiencing, along with the tremendous growth in St. George, great difficulty on the part of the residents to access primary care physicians. The need for additional primary care physicians, to recruit them to the community and to be able to provide a place to practice was the number one priority on our list. And also to be able to provide for urgent care. So that building became the first construction at River Road to deal with primary care needs. I don't know, I don't like that, but man, I'm almost forgetting all of these, but you're right. And trying to think back to why that happened, and maybe I can say a little bit more about that. That does have historical significance. Because of the rapid growth of the St. George community, the ability for existing primary care physicians to meet the needs of residents was extremely difficult. As we looked to encourage physicians in the community to recruit partners, it was increasingly difficult to recruit doctors to St. George to join small practices. The practices didn't have the infrastructure or the ability to be able to recruit physicians effectively. We were seeing more and more young physicians wanting to join groups rather than to open their own practice. More and more physicians who were interested in basically practicing medicine with a salary rather than as an entrepreneur. The need to bring more primary care physicians to the community is what really sparked the development of the white building on River Road across from Harmon's grocery store that became the primary care center, along with the Instacare. It also was the first step in creating the physician division in St. George, where we were able to create a structure that allowed a more effective recruitment of doctors to the community to meet that expanding need.
Okay. So, I know you broke ground on the River Road campus. It was right after September 11th, right? Can you talk a little bit about that and community response and about that event and then about the construction after?
Let me say a couple of things that I see on my list I tried to capture that are important to me. They may not be historical, but they are emotional epiphanies, or they are ahas for me along the way here. For almost 15 years, no, wasn't that long. For close to a dozen years during my tenure at Dixie Regional Medical Center, my office at 400 East was located immediately beneath the emergency room. It was an interesting office because it was below grade, although I did have one high window behind my desk that allowed me to tell if it were day or night, cloudy or sunny, and not much more. It didn't give me a view, but it gave me a perspective as to the mission of the hospital. Underneath the emergency room, I would hear every ambulance that pulled up. I would hear the emotion of every family arriving at the emergency room in circumstances that are the worst that any of us can imagine, as well as those that resulted in occasional joy that exceeds our ability to comprehend at times. But that daily vantage point caused me to be sensitive to the role that we played and how it could be played by no other organization, institution, or building in our community, that we were relied upon by everyone, and that the advancements we made, the planning that we did, the new services that were developed, all contributed to making our community better. The employees in a hospital generally are pretty special people. People who decide to go to work each and every day to help someone else are special people. And certainly those that worked at Dixie Medical Center and Dixie Regional Medical Center in those days and today were very highly motivated, were extremely compassionate, and were dedicated to improving care and serving our community. It was a tremendous privilege to serve as administrator at that time and to see examples every day of people who extended themselves far beyond what anyone might expect to provide quality care. We were a small rural hospital, somewhat isolated until the 1970s. And then as the community began to grow, we saw some increases in services, additional physicians. But nonetheless, in those early days, in the mid and late 80s, we continued to be a small rural hospital. However, as as we planned, we decided that our mission was going to be the best 100-bed hospital in America. I remember those days, and I remember the planning sessions with the management team and establishing that goal. And why not? But 100 beds pretty well defined our capacity and capabilities. But whatever we did, we wanted to be the best 100-bed hospital in America. Later on in our development, as we prepared for the groundbreaking and expansion of the hospital on the River Road campus, we had the opportunity to think big. And I remember it was Andrew Carnegie who once said, "Since you're going to be thinking anyway, think big." We were unconstrained by the current campus. We were not restrained by what was. We really were introduced to an opportunity to think, what if, as we moved to the River Road campus, as we made the plans for the River Road campus. And as we thought of the River Road campus providing healthcare services for our community for the next 100 years, our thoughts changed. For me personally, the biggest change happened when I was paid a visit by a young patient. Her name was Cambria. Cambria, I believe at the time that I met her, was in her early teens. And Cambria, as she explained her story to me, had been diagnosed as a child with cancer. She had been treated in our cancer center. She had received radiation and chemotherapy and had been admitted over 30 times to the hospital. Her mother said that she called them sleepovers, and she actually looked forward to them and packed her bag and prepared for her sleepover at the hospital. She had also ridden in the ambulance twice, taken to the hospital in an emergency condition. But as you combine that experience of that young lady, she clearly was the foremost expert on care at Dixie Regional Medical Center. She came into my office with her mother to express thanks for everyone who had helped her at the hospital. And she made this statement to me that I remember as if it happened yesterday. She said, "I think you have the most wonderful hospital in the world." Now, I appreciate that on one level, having a young teenage girl make that assessment, given her experience, was cute and natural. But it had a profound effect on me as I thought about her experience. And the fact is, for every patient who comes into the hospital, our goal has to be the best hospital in the world at meeting their need right now. If we were able to do that for every person who came to the hospital, we truly would be the best hospital in the world. Later, it dawned on me that there were a lot of third world nations on the earth that we already exceeded their ability to provide care. And maybe being the best hospital in the world wasn't all that far-fetched of an idea. that we could become much better than maybe any of us appreciated or realized. I thought at one point in time that if the Mayo brothers can establish a world...
Thought it was off. Sorry.
That's all right.
Earlier. Redo that.
Some of this is boring, but you're going to cut it to make it sound good. But at one point I'd thought that if the Mayo brothers could establish an internationally known hospital in Rochester, Minnesota, why couldn't we be an internationally known hospital in St. George, Utah? We were already the best place west of the Mississippi to retire. And we all know that the older we become, the more we need health services. So if we're the best place west of the Mississippi to retire, we have to be the best hospital to support those retirees west of the Mississippi. Now we just needed to surpass the hospitals on the eastern divide. But Rochester, Minnesota, I mean, let's get real. St. George, Utah can be a lot better than that. And so that theme of being the best hospital in the world and the best hospital in the universe began to emerge with the brand new facilities, the opportunity to expand services. Obviously, heart services was the major innovator to everything that happened at River Road. I remember being in my office one afternoon, shortly after the decision was made that we were indeed moving to a new campus, that the signature service that would be introduced on that new campus would be open heart surgery. That afternoon, I received a phone call, and it was from Dr. Roger Millar. Dr. Millar was a well-known heart surgeon practicing at LDS Hospital in Salt Lake City at the Intermountain Healthcare flagship at that point. Their program had been recognized nationally for outstanding quality results, and Dr. Millar was the team leader. I answered the phone, and he introduced himself and said, "I understand that St. George will be in the process of developing an open heart surgery program when it moves to the new campus." I explained that that decision had been made and that we were moving forward in that direction. It was interesting to me that he said something I'll never forget. He said, "You know, I don't have to do surgery for money anymore. I've reached a point in my career where I do surgery for a variety of reasons." No, I don't want to go there. He said, "I've been involved in developing one other startup program in my career. It was early on that I helped establish an open heart surgery program in Oregon. As I look back on my career, that was probably the most rewarding experience of my life. I'd like to have the opportunity to do that again before I retire. I'd like to come to St. George and help you establish the program." Oh, what an incredible offer that was. The opportunity to be able to establish a program from the ground up with an experienced surgeon who had done this sort of thing before, who was nationally recognized, whose colleagues understood the talent and ability and the results that he'd been able to achieve. To be able to lead that effort was an incredible and fortuitous event of major proportion that propelled Dixie Regional Medical Center to the positions of recognition that it enjoys today. I don't know how many of us can fully appreciate what it means to go through open heart surgery. I haven't had that experience, but it's not one that's on my list to want to experience. The establishment of a new program all sounds well and good until you consider someone has to be the first person. Someone has to be the first patient. I think it dawned on me one day that as administrator of the hospital, I think I have to be willing to be the first patient to have open heart surgery. That I have to feel comfortable that we are ready, that we understand all of the possibilities of what might happen along the way, that we need to be prepared to be able to take care of that first patient as if it were our 500th patient, and being able to meet whatever need might happen. Having Dr. Millar lead the team, and then having the incredible resources of Intermountain Healthcare to be able to bring staff from LDS Hospital so that we could function too deep at every position as we did those first few cases, so that we had experienced personnel at every position to take people through that entire process, gave me incredible confidence and caused me to feel I'm ready. I could be the first patient. Now, I remember when Dr. Millar told me that he had identified our first patient to have surgery. Our first patient was in his mid-80s and ended up needing 4 or 5 bypasses. I remember asking Dr. Millar if he was sure, couldn't we start with an easier case, a younger, healthier patient that needed less intervention? And he assured me, we're ready, we can do this. And sure enough, a tremendous result occurred, and the program was launched.
Great. Can we go back to Cambria?
Yeah.
She was at, didn't she come to the groundbreaking?
She did.
Was part of that.
Yes, she was.
That story too.
Cambria became a very special young lady in my life for that brief time, as she related her experience, and which really became the inspiration for me personally to think about the new hospital on River Road and what it had to be and what it could be. And as Cambria left my office, I couldn't get her off of my mind. And a few days later, I called her and asked her if she'd be willing to help me. And she said, sure, what do I need to do? I said, we are going to have a celebration. We are going to prepare to build a brand new hospital. And I'd like you to help me turn the dirt with the shovel at the new hospital. She didn't exactly understand all that I meant, but said she'd be happy to do so if it helped the hospital. And Cambria helped turn some dirt and cut the ribbon as we opened the hospital sometime later after the groundbreaking. and has remained an individual that I see periodically in the community. I remembered when she started driving. I remembered when she went to Dixie College and has now gone on in her life. It reminds me of why everyone dedicates and combines their efforts to do the best they can every single day to be the best hospital for each and every patient at the moment they need us.
Great. Let's see. What was your most memorable healthcare experience during your time here at Dixie Regional? Any great stories you have or anything memorable?
There were so many memorable experiences over a 20-plus year career. Fortunate to be a part of an incredible community, and an incredible community of healthcare providers, physicians that were dedicated far beyond what I think most people would ever expect of doctors, of nurses, technicians, housekeepers, grounds crew. I always thought we had the most beautiful grounds. We didn't have a lot to work with at 400 East, but it was park-like. People took great pride in their job everywhere around the hospital. We also had wonderful patients. That sounds kind of funny, but when you care for people who are grateful for the care they receive, it's an incredible experience as all of that comes together. So it's difficult for me to identify the most memorable moments. Perhaps the first red carpet discharge we did. I remember a young lady who had been involved in a four-wheeler accident. I can't remember the particular details. She was the youngest member of the Bundy family, I remember that. And during a holiday gathering, the family were on four-wheelers, and somehow or other, this young, little older than toddler had been injured in a four-wheeler accident to the point that her survival was in serious jeopardy. She ended up using, I think, virtually every resource of Dixie Medical Center in those days on her behalf, and after an extended stay in the hospital of almost 45 days, as I recall, she recovered and was discharged. As I was told of her impending discharge and the end of her care, it seemed as though we needed to do something special. And I don't know why, but the idea occurred to me, well, can't we roll out a red carpet and let her walk to her car as she left the hospital? It wasn't easy. Apparently, we hadn't done a lot of red carpet anythings in the community, but we did find and piece together enough pieces of carpet to meet her family at the exit door as her car pulled up, and she was a part of a red carpet discharge. There were opportunities. I don't know if the time was simpler. I don't know, as the community was smaller and where virtually everyone who worked in the hospital had the opportunity to not treat patients, but to care for friends and family. There was something personal and special about those who were cared for at Dixie Medical Center and those who provided the care. But that red carpet discharge stands out as a special memory, along with other special memories that we've discussed.
Can we talk a little bit about, we have this beautiful life flight helicopter now, just the transition while you've been here from, the fixed wing and how things have changed in that regard.
Okay. It's interesting for me because of the time that I served between the mid-'80s to 2006. So many advancements took place during that period of time as the community grew and as the sophistication of the hospital expanded, that it's difficult looking back to see how far we've come in such a relatively short period of time. When I arrived, we had limited ambulance service, and it was traditional ambulance, and the reach of those ambulances was not particularly far, basically the county and Mesquite. As services expanded and we began to see growth, efforts began to establish a fixed-wing air ambulance service, primarily to meet the needs of so many people who would arrive at Dixie Medical Center where we did not have the capabilities to meet their needs and needed to be transported as quickly as possible to the more advanced centers on the Wasatch Front. As those volumes reached a critical point and it became feasible to establish a fixed-wing air ambulance, things changed. Our ability to save lives, to make major differences in the care of people by getting them to more advanced and sophisticated services was an incredible blessing for the community. And our fixed-wing air ambulance was a source of great pride to the medical center and the transport team. Interestingly, as that air ambulance matured and expanded, the number of people going to Salt Lake City began to define much more clearly the needs for services that potentially could be offered in St. George, most notably heart services, and the number of people that were being transported from the community to Salt Lake City for care. The medical center was experiencing a greater and greater impact on the expanded and extending region beyond Washington County. And we would have more and more patients that would be flown to St. George for care. So the volume of our air ambulance service was growing dramatically. During that point in time, plans began for St. George having its own rotary wing helicopter service that would be focused much more on bringing people to services in St. George rather than flying them from St. George to other locations for care. That was a remarkable change that happened over, again, a relatively short period of time, and again signaled the dramatic changed nature of Dixie Regional Medical Center as being the heart of care for an entire region, basically Utah County South and Page, Arizona, to Moapa, Nevada. Our reach grew much, much wider as a result of having a rotary wing life flight service.
Can you talk a little bit also about the NICU and the amazing transformation with the ability to treat children locally?
Yes.
And Dr. Eggert is amazing.
Absolutely. Our medical center has been and clearly was blessed as the transition from Dixie Medical Center to Dixie Regional Medical Center occurred. One of the other services that made a tremendous difference was the ability to care for very young, premature infants. Dr. Eggerts that came to our community as a lead neonatologist at the McKay-Dee Hospital Center in Ogden. As he arrived and brought with him the capabilities and the leadership to expand services and to organize services to care for younger and younger and sicker newborns, also transformed Dixie Regional Medical Center. I think many people look at St. George as a retirement community, but if we take a look at our community in detail, we see that it actually has a bimodal distribution in the population. We have a very young population, which is marked by 26,000 students in the school district, and we have a retired population. I think many young families are here to provide services to support those services necessary for retirees, but it's often a surprise for people to recognize the number of deliveries performed in our community and the number of very sick or premature babies that are delivered. So the NICU, in terms of having an impact on parents and families to be able to keep them together while they experience the challenges of dealing with a child in the newborn intensive care unit, dramatically changed our personality as well.
Great.
I don't know if that's it or not.
That's great. Appreciate it.
A couple of other snippets that I think I have to mention. During my course of association with Dixie Regional Medical Center, I was inspired by the example of many physicians who were truly, as we look back on it, medical pioneers in modern times. I think it began with Dr. Philip McMahill. Dr. McMahill was a medical oncologist that we successfully recruited after his training at the University of Utah, to be our first oncologist residing in St. George. Dr. McMahill was an incredible individual whose patients absolutely adored him, who had a skill and ability that became almost legendary. His desire to see the development of cancer services in St. George caused him to work tirelessly to establish the infrastructure that is primarily associated with much larger cancer centers than we were. He often wore 5 or 6 hats to ensure that we met the standards of larger cancer centers, to the point that we achieved accreditation by the American College of Surgeons. And at the time we received that accreditation, we were the smallest fully accredited cancer center in the United States. I attribute much of our growth and development to the example of Dr. McMahill and to the professional nature in which he cared for patients and met the needs of referring doctors. When I arrived, there were 32 members of the medical staff, an interesting group of physicians who had chosen to come to St. George long before it was popular to move to St. George. They worked together in a very unique way. There were many small communities that struggled in accepting new doctors. Strangely enough, physicians can often represent a competitive threat to other doctors. And as medical staffs grow, sometimes there is intense conflict on the medical staff. Interestingly enough, in St. George, we were blessed with a group of physicians who welcomed the advances represented by new medical specialties and new physicians coming to the staff. The physicians were excited to learn what special capabilities those new doctors had and how they could help them care for their patients better. As a result, we saw tremendous growth over a relatively short period of time by the medical staff, and I attribute that because the medical staff was open and welcoming to new members of the staff, bringing new capability, new techniques, and new services. I don't think that the lay public can fully appreciate how much that means to a hospital, but it made all of the difference. There were a small group of outstanding leaders on the medical staff when I arrived. Dr. Craig Booth, Dr. Bruce Williams, Jerry Marsden, so many others that understood that it took a team to provide quality care, that it wasn't just a function of a single individual, that if we were going to be an outstanding medical center and truly meet the needs of the community, that we had to find ways to embrace change, embrace new developments, and to work as a team. And as a result, the cancer services, newborn intensive care, heart services, neurology, and so many others were embraced by the existing medical staff, again, as a result of the example of that small group of dedicated leaders. And I've left out so many people, and it's so bad, and I'll think of other things later, but,
Okay.
you know.
You want to tell that story again about John Wayne?
Oh,
Yeah.
you know, I'm going to tell a longer story, and you'll have to pull out pieces, okay?
Just so you know, we're
Out of
getting
tape.
down on battery, and we're over 65 minutes in footage.
65 minutes. Cool. You should get something good out of that, man.
How much time do we have?
We've got about 18 minutes battery left.
Okay.
Oh, man, I can do that easy.
Time- okay.
I grew up as a youth about 30 miles east of Los Angeles, not in a town, but in a suburb. One of the things that I loved about coming to St. George was it's a community. There's a tremendous barn-raising mentality in this community. I remember so many times over the years someone who would experience difficulty or tragedy, and the whole community would come together to try to help. I remember the landscaping project being done at Dixie State College's Dixie Center by volunteers because there were no more funds in the budget. Example after example made this an incredible community which was extremely appealing to me. I became fascinated over learning about the history of this community and the sacrifices that were made by so many pioneers in the establishing of this community. I remember reading in the journal of an early pioneer who talked about the difficulty of trying to raise crops in this barren desert with the unpredictable flow of water through the Virgin River. And he wrote in his journal, "We don't know what to do with the Virgin River. It's too thick to drink and it's too thin to plow." Just incredible hardships endured by people to carve out a community here. I think those sacrifices may have contributed to a very special community spirit that exists here. But whatever it is, I felt a kinship to this notion of community and to the history that applied here. I wanted to learn as much as I could about the history of the medical center, about Dr. McGregor establishing the first hospital, about the Dixie Pioneer Memorial Hospital that was built in 1952. And as a matter of fact, Barbara Watson, my first board chairman, gave birth to the first male born at Dixie Pioneer Memorial Hospital, David Watson. But I also was intrigued to learn that the first baby born was an elementary school teacher who taught a few of my children. She, crap, I forget her name.
We're going to actually interview her.
Good.
It's Queen
Eileen, what's her last name?
Torgerson.
Yeah. I was excited to learn that the first baby born was Eileen Torgerson. Eileen lived in Enterprise, and her mom made her way to the hospital in 1952, and Eileen was the first baby delivered. Apparently, there was a community-wide contest, and there were people who had, in the business community, put up prizes that were awarded to the first baby born in the brand new hospital. And interestingly enough, and not a lot of people know this, but Eileen's mother gave her the first name, which she does not go by, but gave her the first name of Dewinna, because she was the winner of the contest for the first baby born at the Dixie Pioneer Memorial Hospital. The administrator during several of